Nigeria. I'd just like to talk about something interesting that happened yesterday. So my colleague travels every year and he usually travels for a week for the vacation, for the summer vacation. This time around, he told my boss yesterday that he was going to travel for 2 weeks. And my boss looked at him and said, "Why 2 weeks?" And he smiled back at him and didn't say anything. So my boss said, "Oh, I get it. Since the Naira has been devalued, it means that your dollar budget has reduced, therefore the 2 weeks." So I guess, people's travel plans might have been affected in terms of international travel, but it's a good time to, explore what Nigeria has to offer in terms of travel destination. There are nice spots in Nigeria. So that's part of the idea of economic diversification. So this is a very good opportunity for us to grow other sectors beyond the oil sector. Melissa, our esteemed guest speaker, is going to share her views and opinion on how that can be achieved in a sustainable manner. So I'd like to talk about Melissa, just give a bit of a background so that you know who you're talking to, who is presenting today. Melissa is a research analyst, and she has been doing this for 25 years and has covered various sectors. She has experience in Asia and as well as Europe, mainly Eastern Europe. And she has worked for Wall Street, institutions such as Prudential Securities and NASA. These are very popular names. She has a BA in history and an MBA from the New York University. She's also a Toyota holder, like most of us. More importantly, she's the founder of African Sunrise Partners, and she's on the advisory committee, that advises the US government on doing business in Nigeria. So she's no stranger to Nigeria as well as, in Sub-Saharan Africa. So she's no stranger to Sub-Saharan Africa as well as Nigeria. She understands the terrain very well. And, she's going to share her views. So I would hand over to Melissa. A round of applause as she takes the floor.
Thanks, Shuka. Good morning, everybody. And thanks again for your patience with IT. You think you know what can go wrong, you always try to prepare, but it doesn't work that way. What Shuka didn't say is that my father is a CFA charter holder number 1509 from 1965. So, it's a family competition. My brother has a CFA as well. He did it when he already had 3 kids at home, and I think he did it so he could be out of the house and make his wife do the work. So today I want to talk about a subject that's extremely important. It's a little bit more academic than some of the investment themes you might be thinking about, but it's extremely important for business people, investors, and policymakers to understand some of these core issues. And then again, of course, put Africans to work and make everyone rich. So, what does this mean? Complexity and diversification. What do they require, and what do they mean for a country? Okay. GDP growth alone is not enough. You hear everybody talk about Africa growing rapidly, but that's not enough to really get prosperity. Some countries look rich because they have a lot of mineral resources, but it doesn't mean their people are rich. And unless you have rising productivity, you won't be creating wealth. What you need to create wealth is a good business, legal, and economic climate. Sustained improvements and prosperity don't happen on their own. You've got to have government, business, and investors coordinating and thinking long term. So one of my favorite people in the business is called Ricardo Hausmann. He's a professor at Harvard, and I had the privilege of meeting him several years ago. And I'll let you read this on the slide. But basically, his whole point in this Atlas of Economic Complexity is that you don't do better just because you're smart. You have to recombine that intelligence, create new products, and create new businesses. And then the other quote from this book, which I would highly recommend pulling it down off the web: countries accumulate productive knowledge by developing the capacity to make products of increasing complexity, and everybody plays a role in this process. So one of the things I find from governments is they tend to be very complacent. We have oil money coming in, we're going to make things happen, but the bureaucracy takes 7 years to build a power plant. Well, time is of the essence, because all the African countries that I see have this huge young population coming into the workforce. What are you going to do to keep them occupied and make them a productive part of society? Low-skilled job creation is certainly a part of it. Beneficiation of raw materials, as I'll explain, is not really all that profitable. And forcing companies to put in local content is not necessarily the best way to attract a lot of investors. So I think the message I want you to take away today is there are a lot of success stories out there that Nigeria and other African countries can look to as a model. So what I want to do today is go through 4 quick models to get you thinking. The first one is Nokia. When you think of Nokia, you think about phones, and probably not the best phones anymore, but Nokia started life as a logging company. I'll explain about that in a minute. China, engine blocks and fuel systems, and I'll explain that. Atlas of Economic Complexity, and then a book from the IMF that really addresses some of the issues that I think policymakers should all read. So every skill has to then be the basis for another skill. So we hear African governments say, and with each of these quotes I have someone in mind, but I'm not going to tell you necessarily who, because I want to be able to go back to these countries again. We have a lot of logs. Instead of sending out raw logs, let's process the logs and make furniture. Okay, that's not going to make anybody really very skilled. It doesn't help you very much. So Finland is a great example. They have a lot of trees. Nokia was cutting down trees. Instead of making furniture, they got good at making things that cut other things, which led to a precision high-tech industry. So mobile phones then went the way of all things, became commoditized. However, because Nokia had developed this technology ecosystem, they had developers, which then went on to create Angry Birds. And so here's a picture of, believe it or not, Nokia used to make rubber gum boots. That's in my mother's kitchen, those boots over there. The best rubber boots you ever want to have if you live in Vermont where it snows all the time. And then the phone, and then the Angry Birds. So I mean, this is all from one company that kept developing skills and kept evolving as markets changed. Another thing we hear a lot of governments say is we have a lot of resources, let's figure out how to process them. That's how we're going to put people to work. The problem is these refining and commodity processing industries are hugely capital intensive, they're globally competitive, and they're very low return on capital. It's a lot of capital that goes in, and it doesn't do very much to really develop your skills for the next generation of workers. So what we say is, instead of just blindly saying, we have this stuff in the ground, that's our strategy, industrialization has to be part of a deliberate strategy that includes education, coordination, innovation, and diversification. And one of the ways that I think about this is based on a lot of time that I spent in China. The job that I had before I decided to start coming to Africa was going to China, understanding China's rise and what it meant for multinational companies like GE and Caterpillar. And what I learned was the Chinese took a very deliberate approach. You can go back and find the 5-year plans that China has published in each of its cycles since they started becoming a capitalist country. And they're very specific and they're very deliberate, and each new plan builds on the last plan. So first they built the infrastructure, they had a very high savings rate which allowed them to reinvest domestically, and then the manufacturing strategy originally was focused on the domestic market, which is huge. So companies had cheap power, land, transport, everything was really cheap, which allowed these companies to develop scale. Then what the companies did was they said, we're going to take cash flow from domestic sales, invest in research and development, move up the value chain, and compete in global export markets. Now, Africa is the beneficiary of that because a lot of the cheaper equipment that you have here, whether it's power equipment, transportation, machinery, healthcare equipment, consumer goods, it's because of this strategy that they learned how to make things at a much lower cost. And they resulted in bringing 500 million people out of poverty in the last 3 decades. So the engine block company that I mentioned earlier, that's a great example. I know a guy named Jack Krakowski wrote a book called Managing the Dragon, which is pretty interesting. He was a Payne Weber investment banker, went to China, bought some auto companies and really made them work. He found that there was this huge domestic auto parts industry. So from the very lowest end three-wheelers all the way up to heavy trucks, the Chinese were making all their own equipment and the components. So they knew how to do this, some of them well and some of them not well, but they knew exactly how to engineer to the price point the customer would pay for. Where they needed to have higher quality, they copied imported goods or they got certifications. And so they really developed skill by doing. So what he found was with this factory that made the engine blocks, that's a pretty low-value component for a vehicle, they ended up getting so much skill that they developed and created their own fuel systems, which competed with Bosch. Now that's the highest value product that that factory had ever done. What that meant was they could pay higher wages, they had higher productivity per worker, and this is how China got so rich. This is the next section of what I want to talk about, the IMF, and again, this book is available for download. I went to this session at the IMF spring meetings a couple months ago in Washington, and the book was written all about the Gulf states, but as I was sitting in the presentation, I felt like jumping up and saying, why isn't this was filled with African policymakers? Because everything they talked about is directly relevant to the continent. So I talked to them afterwards, I got their slides, I read the book, and here's some of what I think is really important. And I'm going to go through it because there's so much of this to talk about, and we don't want to be here all day, we want Q&A. But first of all, the IMF's point is you have to have a dynamic export sector. And you may think, well, in Nigeria, we have a big enough domestic market, we don't really need to be an exporter, but you do. You at least need to have the quality and the scale and the profitability. Otherwise, it's a mismatch. If you're building things for your domestic market that couldn't be sold internationally, you're either doing a disservice to your domestic market or you're still leaving the door open for better or cheaper imports. So what they say is you have to be globally competitive. You should use foreign firms to come in and bring technology and skills transfer. And then workers learn on the job, they learn by doing. So you have the beginnings of that here with the auto assembly process. I know you've got the carrot and the stick, the tariffs, and then the incentives to build vehicles here locally. But that should be a much broader, more consistent, more connected strategy so that there's a long-term process of making the parts and doing all the repair and basically developing skill in that type of manufacturing, which could then be used to make all kinds of other things. This is also where innovation happens. That's why the auto part guys in China could make fuel systems. So then the IMF in this book goes through a lot of examples, and I think it's really helpful to think about other countries that may have started where Nigeria, where some African countries are, and then some that are maybe completely different. So in Ireland, they mentioned specifically that the universities trained engineers, and Ireland has this enormous industry of the contract manufacturing, outsourcing for making technology. So a BlackBerry or a laptop or any kind of electronic thing isn't made by that company. It's made by Jabil or Flextronics. A lot of them were in Ireland, and that was because Ireland had a coordinated strategy to get the universities to train these engineers. Malaysia is another good example. They had horizontal and vertical integration in their industries. They required investors to come in with technology transfer, and then they had these other incentives, free trade zones, and then some of these things, again, they could be documents on a website of the Ministry of Industry, but they need to actually be coordinated and thought through as to who you're trying to attract and why. South Korea is an example that people love to use. I'm a little less excited about it. I think South Korea had some geopolitical reasons for not wanting to be conquered again by Japan or China, so they went full on with heavy industry. The problem you have now with South Korea is they never really developed a services sector. A lot of their manufacturing has been hollowed out by China, where the cheaper stuff went to China, and the heavier stuff like shipbuilding and nuclear power plants and that type of equipment stayed in South Korea. And now they've also been undercut by the Chinese, and they've had no discipline in the capital allocation, so you have over-investment in big, heavy industry that ends up wasting capital, and it's not helping the country right now. Most of the shipbuilders are actually bankrupt. So that's, you've got to be careful with that one. Indonesia, to me, is one of the most interesting and relevant examples. It's a big country, more than 300 million people. History of plenty of political turmoil. They had some oil, but per capita wasn't that much. Nigeria, and now they're a net importer. For a long time, they had state-owned firms that ran industries, but they were not accountable to anybody. So they were also isolated from global competition. They did things the way they thought it should be done. It wasn't productive, and it really held back the state. So the way the IMF talks about this, Indonesia was the only OPEC country to use its oil revenues for growth. And I think what's important here is they devalue their exchange rate, which Nigeria has partially done. When the currency is cheap, then your exports are much more attractive. Japan helped them out by offshoring a lot of the labor-intensive industries. That's a good strategy in the short run, but it's a race to the bottom in terms of who else in the world is willing to do it cheaper. And Indonesia started with low-end labor, but now they're heavily involved in aircraft maintenance and repair, and also aircraft parts manufacturing, and that's a very high-value type of industry. So this is more detail from the IMF. There are recommendations for how government should think about it. I mean, first of all, make sure the public sector is not the employer of first resort, so your best and brightest go into government. That's a problem in a lot of the countries that are attached more to the French model, where government is really the best thing to do. And their advice is pick sectors rather than firms, develop domestic exporters and local technology in sophisticated industries. So again, finding industries that are complex where you can gain the skill and then use it for other sectors. So what I want to show now is the way the Harvard MIT team shows this in this Atlas of Economic Complexity. And I was over at the Nigeria Stock Exchange yesterday, and I mentioned this, and the guy I was talking to went over to his bookshelf and pulled out a hard copy book. So this is a very well-known theory, and people have really started to use it. So what you're going to see here are a schematic that show graphically the exports from any given country. Now in 1968, Nigeria's map was all these different colors of all these things. It was completely complex. And this is unfortunately a very familiar story. But look at Malaysia. So they have all the computer components because there's a very connected supply chain of manufacturing and assembly all throughout Southeast Asia. And Malaysia is a key part of that. But everything in here is refined or processed or high value. Mexico's done the same thing. According to this book, Mexico has not been quite as successful in taking things like the computer assembly and the car assembly and using it to build up the rest of the economy. But still, Mexico's exports are quite diversified. And Indonesia, I mentioned, I mean, they still have some raw materials in here. They have palm, they have crude petroleum, and rubber, but still, considering where they came from, considering their political turmoil that this country's been through, and it's not the easiest place to be. They have a similar religious divide in terms of Muslim-Christian, which makes a lot of things more complicated, and it's also a theme that's worth looking at. But I think they're a success story that Nigeria would do well to emulate. And Kenya, Kenya's very exposed to tea. The interesting thing here, and I don't have the current numbers, but I've been told in the past that Sri Lanka and Kenya produce roughly the same amount of tea, but Sri Lanka does the processing, so the value of the exports is dramatically higher than what Kenya gets. And I know that's Kenya's considered a fairly complex economy for Africa. So this is the darling of the guys who wrote this book. They still have a fair amount of work to do, but they're on the right track. And this is the Netherlands. I mean, there's just everything you can think of in here. One of the things that I like is you can see animal food, cheese, medications. In a lot of the conversations around manufacturing, people think only about machines. But then you start thinking about machines to do a lot of other things, like healthcare devices and processed food and specialty food. So this is a much further advanced example. And then China, you can see how important technology is in the China story. I mean, a lot of China is much poorer than parts of Africa, so it's not like they're starting, as a rich country already. They've brought themselves up here. So what can CFAs do? First of all, remember, Africa's not different. Much as I would love to say it is, because I've staked my career on trying to bring investment into Africa because it's such a special time. But numbers are numbers. And a lot of, again, governments don't understand. They come and say, we need investment. Well, how are you going to pay for it? What are the returns going to be? And I had this conversation with someone yesterday, and we went around in circles. So, investors are in the business of putting money to work to basically satisfy liabilities, and they have to meet those liabilities. So they look for risk-adjusted return. They don't have to be in Africa. No one has to be in Africa. They can invest those funds anywhere. And even the funds that have to be invested here, the domestic pension funds, they deserve a proper return as well. So it's not like there's some special blurring of the lines between for-profit, generate a return higher than your cost of capital type of investing. There's no blurring of those lines in the eyes of investors with social investing. It's, numbers are numbers. So governments everywhere are trying to drive growth, but let's be honest, they're all looking at re-election, and that's not an Africa issue, it's worldwide. It's very difficult for governments to make the type of long-range planning that's required under a lot of these diversification strategies. So what all these different authors talk about, and what I believe, is that business and governments have to really work together to say, okay, we're not going to be in the business of just cutting up logs and making furniture. Let's look at how some other countries have gotten so rich, how their people have been brought out of poverty, and what we can do for ourselves. So, no investor has to be here, but they come and they stay because they see the opportunity relative to the risks as being very attractive. And I just want to get people thinking in a more broad way about how this economic growth is really going to be sustainable. How do we get out of this current cycle of people coming in and out of poverty and countries becoming less stable because they can't put their people to work? And I think this is something that's worth thinking about. And with that, I'd be very happy to take the questions.
Thank you, Melissa. So questions, and maybe we'll just have about 15 minutes to ask questions. So who wants to go?
Hello, Melissa. Thank you very much for what you said. I think you showed a lot of things that we grapple with here that are going to increase in value. But I was listening to the when you were talking about it. You said something about the fact that forcing local government, local content, forcing foreign investment is not ideal. Then you mentioned something about the fact that it's good to attract foreign investors to transfer money.
Yeah.
And that employers, they learn on the job. We have this problem in Nigeria where even Nigerian government or businesses prefer to recruit foreign people because they believe that there's no capacity locally. Now, how would you develop the local capacity if you keep recruiting or attracting people that can do the business from outside? So, if you don't force, like those foreign people, they look at them. It may not be about the fact that you must do this business locally, but even engage local contractors. How are you going to get them to transfer to knowledge?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Those are really important questions. The local content comment, let me just clarify that a little bit, because this is something we've been working on a lot at the President's Advisory Council, because certain countries, and Nigeria is really leading the way in this, are requiring local content or local investment in key sectors, and it works in Nigeria because it's big enough. So, you have an indigenous oil industry now, and those people are learning, they're getting experience, and they'll be the next wave of oil entrepreneurs. But smaller countries are looking at Nigeria as the model, and it's creating a lot of problems for companies when they say, we want to go and sell, Caterpillar wants to sell mining trucks, which they only make in one place in the entire world because they're so huge. But if Mauritania says you have to make them here, it's a complete non-starter because you can't have a manufacturing sector with, separate. And I was having conversations in South Africa about this recently with some government advisors because one of the technology companies, I can't remember if it was IBM or Microsoft or Facebook, one of them said they have a training academy in South Africa for programmers, for app developers. The government counts that as corporate social responsibility. And it's actually a business, and it should be treated as an investment in the business. So that's one of the things that if you force people to have, if you say to a company 25% of the value has to be made locally, what's your objective? Your objective is to create value and skills locally. Well, making the machine locally is not necessarily the best way to do that. So what I'm trying to do is to get people to think about the conversation differently. What's the objective of the government? The government wants to put people to work. Okay, how do we do that? Instead of saying you have to make this part of the machine locally. You know, the really good multinationals all will say that their ultimate goal is to have everybody in their offices to be nationals of that country or that region, because it's too expensive to bring in expats, and you just can't sustain it. I went into a Cummins factory once in Wuxi in China where they make turbos. It's one of only 2 turbo factories Cummins has in the world, and every single person there is Chinese. And so that's where I think the good multinationals are trying to get to. The biggest constraint, you know, and I didn't want to get into this today in the slides, but everyone talks about infrastructure as the biggest constraint. It is, but no disrespect to engineers, we know how to build roads. We know it has to be done. There's no huge reform of thinking or construction or making cement that has to happen. But human capital and knowledge and skills are by far the biggest gating factor to Africa's growth. So a lot of smart people are trying to figure this out. I think the answer is, you know, apprenticeships, you know, technical training, universities, and this is something that I think people are just starting to talk about now on the continent. And then you start to get people like I always talked about the Coca-Cola diaspora, the GE diaspora, the guys that are working in those companies can then go on and run big African companies. And that's the next generation of leadership. I hope that answers your question.
What are the challenges you see in Nigeria? I mean, outside the exchange rate, is it just about talent? Because you've been emphasizing human resources, but what else? I mean, what are they saying? Because we've been on this discussion of attracting FDIs and forever, and you don't see it. So, I mean, since you have like a direct experience, what are they saying?
The biggest challenge in all these, and I'm going to say a lot of countries, not just Nigeria, is government, because you get a policymaker who doesn't understand why something is so important, and they block it and they won't listen, and it doesn't change. And I can really get going on the subject of, you know, visas and bureaucracy and what are you trying to achieve? Why don't you just, you know, get rid of this stuff? What is the purpose? So I think it's perception, it's the reality of challenges. And when I did this presentation in Kenya to the CFAs, I talked a lot more about why is the cost of capital so high here. And you start layering in all the extra things that it takes to do business. And American companies will talk to each other, and a solar company will say, well, we were working in Ghana for 18 months and thought we had a PPA, and then the minister changed, and everything had to start all over again. We wasted 18 months, we could have been somewhere else. And you hear that kind of story all the time, and it usually comes back to government. So that's why I try to emphasize from the business side, you know, elect the right people and then put a lot of pressure on them. But I think, you know, money is coming in. And my portfolio type of investors are still on the sidelines because they think there's another shoe to drop with the currency, and then they'll be in. Foreign direct investment, they take a lot longer, but I think people are starting to realize. Also, one of the recommendations we just made on the advisory council was that the U.S. should establish a formal commercial dialogue with Nigeria to smooth over and accelerate some of these issues.
You didn't really touch on how that complexity, how it does drill down to the people, maybe apart from the case of China, where you said 500 million people have poverty.
Right.
For these other countries, how does it directly translate to improvement in creating wealth for the people and improvement in human development indicators?
Yeah. Okay, I don't have any of those numbers in my head, but they're all in the book, which is online. And so the whole thesis that these authors had is that they went back and did all the scientific research. There is a direct correlation between economic complexity and economic growth. So if you think about it, you know, now you graduate, and when I say you again, I'm talking about lots of African countries. You have young graduates coming out of school. My driver in Nairobi has a lot of children, and the first two graduate with computer technology certificates, and they can't find work because there just isn't enough do because there hasn't been the right policy framework and the right corporate investment. I think, when people come out of college or high school in the United States, there's 3,000 choices that they can make of things to do, and all those jobs exist, and all the precedent is there, they know someone who's done that. So it's really, it's opening up possibilities. You think about the next 50 years of all the young people coming into the workforce. I mean, I've had so many careers. The only reason I was able to do that is because of my liberal arts education and the grounding I got from the CFA and my MBA. So I can zig and zag with whatever the economy does, and that's where you need young people to get to. So if the economy is complex and the training is good and there are a lot of types of jobs, it creates a prosperity that, it has to be deliberately made to be inclusive and, accepting of the realities of the number of people involved in agribusiness, for example, bringing them out of the subsistence level. But in general, the Harvard guys showed a correlation between complexity and growth. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe my question will be related slightly to the first question. And from my understanding, I think your presentation is centered around free market, right? And so the argument for some people is that when you have these multinationals, giants have years of experience, they have economic of skills and all those. And you really need to develop your own local industry. You need